Welcome to this episode of the Think Wildlife podcast. Today I speak to Susan Cheyne, who is the co-director of the Borneo Nature Foundation International. She is also a senior lecturer in biological anthropology and primate conservation at the Oxford Brookes University. This is one of the longest episodes of the Think Wildlife podcast as we cover a wide range of themes. Today we talk about the threats faced by the Bornean rainforest and all the great work the Borneo Nature Foundation is doing to conserve this precious ecosystem. We also extensively talk about the conservation of felines and primates in the Bornean rainforest. Specifically, we talk about Suzanne's personal work surrounding gibbon and clouded leopards in the region. Tune in as this will be a very exciting episode, and do not forget to subscribe and share to the Think Wildlife podcast. So, welcome, Suzanne, to the podcast. It's a pleasure to have you on here today to talk about all the great work you're doing in Borneo.
Thank you. It's great to be here remotely from Jakarta.
So, my first question for you today is that what was the idea behind the Borneo Nature Foundation, and what is the organization's long-term vision?
Gosh, that's a good question to start with. So, Borneo Nature Foundation, we started out with a different name, the Orangutan Tropical Peatland Project, in 1999, going full-time in Borneo in 2003. And as we expanded our work, we realized that we were doing more than just orangutans, and we were working in areas that didn't only have peat swamp forest. So that's why we really we changed the name to give that broader vision of what we were trying to do. And I suppose our vision really is, our long-term vision is protecting the environment, protecting wildlife, but working with people to make that happen. It's not one or the other. We have to work with people to make conservation effective and to make it happen, and to understand people's barriers to why conservation might not work. I think all of us have a responsibility, and yes, people are very often the problem, but that means people can also be the solution. So I suppose our long-term vision is really to have sustainable wildlife, to have wildlife that's thriving in large landscapes, not isolated in small pockets. But I think one of the nice things about BNF as well is that we're very much driven by our team. We have, over 100 full-time Indonesian employees, and they help drive our vision as well. So yes, wildlife for people, I suppose.
So you're the director of BNF International. So how is this different from BNF?
So we're one family, I suppose. The differences are legal. BNF International is a registered charity in the UK, and Borneo Nature Foundation is a registered foundation and charity here in Indonesia. We also have BNF France. So you can follow our social media in 3 languages. But the reason behind that is that we are basically one organization, but for legal reasons, we are have slightly different names because of where we're registered. And that really allows us, both obviously within Indonesia, to operate completely legally and to employ people, but also in the UK the same. And it allows us to access funding as well as registered charities. But it means that we're doing everything legally and by the book.
So BNF is working in 3 different landscapes primarily. So could you just introduce us to these 3 landscapes?
Yes, of course. So the landscape that we've worked in the longest for over 20 years now is the Sabangao National Park. This is the largest landscape that we work in collaboration, of course, with the national park authorities. And it's home to the largest population of orangutans. It's also a peat swamp forest, which means while there aren't really any mountains, but it's a swamp, so it's flooded for 9 months of the year. The second site, if we go a little bit further north, so north of the provincial capital, Palangkaraya, is the Rungan landscape. This is slightly smaller. This is about 5,000 sorry, 2,500 square kilometers, so about half the size of Sabang. Not currently legally protected, but we're working with local communities to protect the forest in a sort of mosaic. This one site is the only one that so far we can confirm that all 5 of Borneo's wildcat species live in this forest. Also very important, of course, for the apes, for orangutans and the gibbons. And the final site is Barito Ulu. It's in the heart of Borneo, so right in the geographical center, right up in the mountains, challenging to get to, challenging to walk around. And another, again, fascinating site, and the smallest of the 3 areas, also currently unprotected legally. But all of these sites are hugely important in terms of the wildlife that they protect and the community, the human communities that they support. So, yeah, we've got a lot to do.
The PNF is working extensively on habitat restoration and protection in these landscapes. So what are the primary threats to the landscapes you're working in?
Each one of them has slightly different threats. Now, obviously, removal, logging, removal of the trees is a major threat. But so the site up in the mountains, one of the biggest threats is mining, extractive industry. One of the biggest problems for the middle site, Rungan, is conversion of the forest for palm oil plantations. And the biggest threat to the Sabangau, to the peat swamp, is fire. Because when peat is dry, it burns incredibly well. The peat is 3 meters deep at its most shallow, maybe up to 18 meters deep at the center of the forest. And when peat is dry, unfortunately, when the hydrology, so the water table, is thrown out of balance because canals have been cut into the peat to extract timber. And this upsets the water balance, and dry peat, the peat becomes extremely dry, exacerbated by very, very long dry seasons because of climate change, means that fire is a huge problem. And I'm from Scotland. We have peat in Scotland, not tropical peat, obviously. And again, people in Scotland and other parts of the world, peat has been used as a fuel source for many, many generations of people. But when it burns, it's extremely bad, and these fires can rage out of control. So what we have to do, of course, is try and restore the habitat. If we've got trees, then it's easier to protect the habitat. So we have to try and replant where logging has taken place, where conversion to plantations has taken place, or where fires have gone through the landscape. That's what we're trying to both restore by planting trees, but also protecting it for the future.
How is BNF involving local communities in habitat protection?
So we are working with the local communities across the 3 landscapes. Excuse me. People are involved in the local firefighting teams. So when the fires start, these incredibly brave people come out and fight the fires. Men and women, I should point out. They're also involved in the reforestation, replanting, with the help of the BNF team and our scientists, and monitoring. And through our community nursery scheme, we work with local people, so they are growing the trees that we will plant back in the forest, in the degraded areas. So a variety of different ways of sort of protecting the forest, regenerating the forest, and really bringing local people in, because everything that we're planting, all the tree species, these are all completely native. We're not planting anything non-native. So we're only planting species that would be found in the forest anyway, because we want to restore it back to what it should be. But also we know that many of these species that we're planting are extremely important food species for the primates, so for the orangutans and the gibbons and other species that eat fruit, like flying foxes, hornbills, sunbears. But that, I suppose, knowledge as well from local people about the best trees and the best species to grow and the best conditions to grow them in is absolutely critical to our work.
So you answered my next question about your restoration projects, but could you just talk about some challenges in restoring these rainforests?
Yes, I think the biggest challenge is the size. There's so much that needs to be restored and replanted. So we have a campaign at the moment. We're hoping by 2025 we want to try and plant 1 million trees. I think the other thing that is very important to get across is that it's not enough to just plant a tree, or obviously many trees, and assume that's job done. We monitor the trees. We look at how survivorship. We look and see, how long these trees last. And generally, before they're planted, they'll grow to about 1 meter before we plant them out in the degraded areas of the forest. So there's a lot of work that has to be done by. You can't just sort of plant the tree and walk away and assume everything will be fine. So it's a very long-term investment. But with the right care, with the right species, and with the right help from people, if we can reforest these areas, it will it will protect the peat, it will protect the rest of the forest, and it will protect the wildlife. But it's a very big job.
I've obviously grown up in Singapore, and I personally experienced the Southeast Asian haze crisis across the 2010s. So this was instigated by forest fires in Kalimantan and other parts of the rainforest. Firstly, you briefly spoke about peatlands. So why are they so important as an ecosystem, and why are they being burned so extensively in the region?
So peat is formed from debris, detritus from the forest. So when leaves fall from the tree and bark, that's what builds up and creates the peat. So it's sort of self-sustaining, but that also means that it's very susceptible to disturbance. Using cores of the peat, not myself, but other researchers have estimated that the peat in Sabangao is about 30,000 years old. So it's pretty old. It's also very deep, and therefore it's an extremely important source of carbon. It is storing a lot of carbon underground, under our feet. Obviously, there's important carbon in the trees and above ground, but basically when we're in that swamp, we're walking on, thousands of years of stored stored carbon. And as long as it stays in the ground and it's not burning, that's fine. The problem is that, as I said, when the peat is disturbed, so when people have gone in and cut these canals into the peat in order to float out the logs illegally, that results in the water table becoming impacted. So the water table drops. The peat therefore starts to dry out. That means that the dry peat is very brittle. So even before it burns, it's very brittle. So that doesn't allow it to support trees very well. Of course, trees need, nice big rainforest trees need strong root system. And if the peat is brittle and dry, it doesn't support the trees, so that get more tree fall. And then the peat burns. And when it burns, it releases, of course, it creates the smoke that you've mentioned. But in this smoke, unfortunately, is quite a lot of nasty, toxic stuff that's really bad for everybody's health. Very bad for humans. It's very bad for the animals. And this toxic haze as well, it blocks the sun. So the trees themselves are not getting access to sunlight. So they're not photosynthesizing as much as they could be. So these fires, they really are a huge problem for everyone, wildlife and people. the fact that because we're having longer dry seasons and the rains aren't coming as early or coming when they should be, means that these fires are also burning more and longer. Some of the fires, yes, are natural. You know, trees get hit by lightning and dry trees will spark a fire. Sometimes the fires are set deliberately. Some they could just be an accident. The ground is so incredibly dry that just a carelessly dropped cigarette can spark a fire. But these fires are extensive. They happen, all over the peatlands, and as you say, you can see on satellite images, the smoke travels from Borneo up to Malaysia. It travels up to Singapore. I mean, it really is a massive problem.
These are all accidental fires, but aren't natural forest fires meant to be beneficial for the health of rainforests and most ecosystems?
Yes, certainly some ecosystems are designed to benefit from fire. It allows regeneration. It allows regrowth to take place. It clears the way for new tree growth. The problem with these fires is they are happening so frequently and so extensively that they are out of control. They've broken the sort of natural cycle. The other problem is that when these fires happen so frequently, any seeds that have been dispersed and might be lying dormant in the soil, basically they've been incinerated. And so natural regeneration cannot take place because the seed bank has been fried. That's why what we're doing with BNF, we have to do this habitat restoration, this reforestation, because these fire events have killed off any of the have killed off the seeds that would naturally germinate. And so we have to do assisted reforestation. So yes, the problem is that these fires, as I said, the frequency and intensiveness of the fires, it's been thrown out of whack. So an occasional fire every 10, 15 years, probably is something that the ecosystem probably could recover from. But these fires are happening pretty much annually. So yes, it's an enormous problem.
So BNF is involved with various social development programs. So one of them is the social forestry program. So could you talk a bit about this?
Yes, of course. So the social forestry program is an initiative by the Indonesian government, which allows interested communities to take ownership of their community, of their forest, of their land. So it's a legal status, and we're working with communities around the Rungan landscape, those that want, obviously, to assist with this process, if they're interested, to be able to develop social forestry units, each one managed by the individual communities. Within that, there's the possibility that the communities may wish to set up ecotourism projects, which we can help and support, but that's up to them. So BNF is really kind of working with the communities. It's what they want. If they feel that the social forestry would be beneficial for their community, for that land, we can assist with the paperwork side of things, but also management side of it. We can provide advice if they're interested in doing sort of ecotourism. Again, it's very much driven. That's the important thing. Excuse me. It's driven by the communities. We're there to help and facilitate, but not impose ideas, but work very much with people.
What are some of the community development projects BNF is involved in, and how successful have these been? Like, what have been some of the key challenges, and how have local communities responded to them?
So each of the communities that we work with around the different landscapes, again, we're working with some people who live very close to the regional capital, some people who are much more removed, for example, up in the mountains. And it's about understanding how we can support people to do something in terms of community development and what is it that they need. And again, very much not going down the route of us coming in and saying, right, you should be doing this, you should not be doing this. So supporting people with livelihood ideas that they already have. So permaculture, aquaculture, so fish ponds, sorry, and exploring ideas around what people are already doing, but hopefully also facilitating sort of good practice in terms of, okay, yes, if we're building creating fish ponds, fish farms, what's the best way of looking after those fish so that will generate income. Also working with people, so our I want to say they're polybag, they're not called polybags. When we plant all of the trees back into the reforestation area, we work with a local community, women actually, who create these little baskets that we use to each seedling or sapling is in its own little basket. So it's got this stuff called purun. So instead of using polybags, so this is natural materials, so that each tree can be easily transported. It can be planted straight in the ground in its little purun basket, and that then just biodegrades. So, but this is a traditional type of weaving that these women do. So, but through them having created a cooperative, and we now buy all of these purun baskets rather, from them. And I'm fairly certain that I think one of the oldest women in this community group is 80, and she's still creating these purun baskets for us to use to replant and hopefully reforest the savanna. It's a sort of sedge kind of plant.
So what about the outreach programs you guys are working upon?
So, well, we really want everybody to sort of be aware of what we're doing, not just in Indonesia, but around the world, which is what we're quite fortunate. We've now got our social media in 3 languages. I suppose our biggest outreach is through our education program, and we really try and start with again, this is nobody is forced to join this, but we start with the kids when they're about 6 or 7, and through the various different components of the education program, they can stay with us right through until they're 18. We're very much hoping at the moment that some of the they're not children anymore, some of the young people who have gone through our education program, we're working with various partners, we can support them with scholarships if they wish to go to university. So really it's about empowering and creating a conservation generation, and we're very fortunate that several of the young women now who have been through our education program are now wanting to go to university and to carry on in the sort of in the conservation field. So really supporting local people to be able to play an active role in the conservation of their own environment.
So how is BNF using drones for conservation?
We've used them a little bit to look for orangutan nests, but I think the biggest thing that we've been using them for, and even just in the last few weeks, is with a camera on there with an infrared camera. That drone flying over the fires can identify the hottest point of the fire. And so we can direct the firefighting teams to that hottest point so they can tackle the fire at source. And that's a game changer. Because if you look at the fire just on the ground, it can be, these things can be burning over tens of meters. And by having the drone that can pick up where the hottest point of the fire is, so where the fire is really burning, and we target that first, the firefighters target that hot spot first, it just makes everything so much more effective. The drone also, perhaps even more importantly, is the drone can also monitor what is happening to the fires over a larger area and communicate directly with the team in real time to keep people safe. So that's really the biggest thing that I think we've been using the drone for is the firefighting.
So talk about some of the research BNF is doing on orangutans and how have the results been so far?
So with the orangutan work, it started in actually earlier than 1999, but by counting nests, orangutans make nests every day. Every orangutan will make a new nest before going to sleep every single day, which sounds like an awful lot of work. I've tried to make an orangutan nest or make a nest myself to copy. I was terrible at it. So by counting the nests, that is a way that we can get an idea about the number of animals in a forest. It's a little bit more complicated than just counting nests, but that's basically the approach. And that's why with that, we identified that the Sabangao is the home to the largest continuous population of orangutans in the world, which is exciting, also challenging. But because of that, we can also monitor their populations over time. Some of the other interesting things that have been found, my work is less on the orangutans, or my personal interest rather, I'm more about the cats and the gibbons. My colleague, Helen Mora Bernard, she's discovered that, well, orangutans have medicine. There is a type of plant, a Dracania plant, that people have used around this area as an analgesic, so a sort of painkiller. And Helen has discovered that orangutans in this forest in Sabangao, and I'm fairly certain they've not seen this behavior anywhere else, they will chew this plant, they won't eat it, they'll just chew it up so it sort of creates a bit of mush, and will rub it on parts of their body. We think because it's a painkiller. And this is absolutely fascinating. They don't eat it. They never eat it. We've only seen them do this occasionally. And some of the other, I think, incredible, orangutans have the longest childhood other than humans. A young orangutan will spend at least 8 years with mum before potentially going off and becoming a little bit more independent. And that learning period, and again, understanding how a mother orangutan teaches a youngster how to find food, how to build a nest. All of this is a lot of this is information that you can't get by just going into an area for a short period. It's the importance of the of long-term studies of wildlife. So with the orangutans now 20 years.
What other primate species is BNF working on?
Everything, almost everything. We try and take a sort of landscape ecosystem approach because everything is connected. if we are only focused on protecting part of an environment just for one species, like a primate, then we're ignoring everything else, like the carnivores, the insects, birds. We are sometimes a little bit limited by our own expertise. We've never really had anyone who's taken a great interest in snakes. So that's always something that's on our bucket list if somebody would like to come and join us to do some studies on snakes. So we're trying to do as much as possible. We've done a lot of work on dragonflies and butterflies. These are very short-lived species, so they're really great indicators of the health of a forest. Because they're short-lived, you can see changes much more quickly than you could if you were studying an orangutan or a gibbon who could live for up to 50 years. So we really try and do everything. And of course, we're always hugging trees. We're always monitoring the trees because, again, that gives us the information that we need to be able to reforest areas that have been damaged. So we try and do everything everywhere all at once.
So now moving on towards your own career. So what got you interested in studying primates and specifically gibbons?
So my parents moved around a lot while I was growing up, and we spent many years living in Zambia, and many family holidays were on safari in Zambia, and I'd always been fascinated by wildlife, and I decided, I think about when I was about 10, I wanted to work with wildlife somehow. Wasn't quite sure how. And I thought I would always go back to Zambia, but then while I was doing my undergraduate, there was an advert offering volunteering opportunities at a gibbon rehabilitation project in Thailand. So this is where gibbons have been, rescued from the illegal wildlife trade, and the hope is that, if possible, to return them back to the wild. And I went to Thailand and I just fell in love with gibbons. And they're singing. They are the singing, swinging apes. They're just magical. And that was kind of it. Gibbons don't live in Africa, so I didn't go back to Africa. I stayed. I came to Indonesia to do my PhD more than 20 years ago, good grief. And that was it.
Before we continue with the conservation side of stuff, which species of gibbon are you referring to?
So in Thailand, it was the white-handed gibbon, the lar, also called the lar gibbon. My work in Indonesia has mostly focused on the white-bearded gibbon, which was only found on Borneo, but with other work that I do with the IUCN, the International Union for the Conservation of Nature, I am trying to support people who are working with all 20 species of gibbons. So across Southeast Asia, 20 species in 11 countries. But it was the lar gibbon was the first one I met in Thailand.
So what makes primates so crucial for ecosystems?
They are gardeners. They disperse seeds. So they'll consume the fruit and then transport the seeds away from the parent tree. So that helps with natural reforestation, regeneration. So yeah, I mean, without primates, the ecosystem itself, the forest itself, really, regeneration is very badly impacted if there aren't any primates. So yeah, that's the main reason, is they are the gardeners. They keep the forests alive, regeneration, and of course we need forests because they produce oxygen.
You initiated a gibbon research project in the Sambagao Forest catchment area. So, talk about what motivated you to start this project and what were the key aspects you focus on for your research?
So my PhD was looking at rehabilitation of gibbons who have been caught in the illegal wildlife trade and returning them back to the wild. The project in Sabang was with completely wild gibbons. And what I really wanted is, well, what my thinking was that if we wish to return gibbons back to the wild, lots of considerations we have to think about, but we need to know what, completely wild gibbons are doing. So we've got a benchmark for the ones that we're trying to rehabilitate. But also I thought nobody had actually, up until that point, nobody had studied gibbons in a peat swamp forest. And my colleague Helen had been starting looking at the orangutans, and I thought, wouldn't this be a fascinating thing to compare the behavior of these endangered species in the same habitat, to get more information about gibbons, to help projects that were trying to return gibbons back to the wild that had been in the illegal wildlife trade, but also to understand about their behavior and ecology. What more can we do, should we do, to protect them? And one of the things that did come up is that, unsurprisingly, when there's this terrible smoke from the fires, the gibbons don't sing very much. It's understandably, if any of us is breathing in all this horrible smoke, the last thing you really want to do is sing. But also, they're incredibly well, we knew they were territorial, but their territories, their home ranges within the forest are extremely fixed over very, very long periods of time, decades even. So, home is where the heart is when it comes to a gibbon. But also, they can be quite resilient. They're relatively, compared to an orangutan, their bodies, they're much smaller. Maybe 10 at most 12 kilograms a gibbon, much, much smaller than an orangutan. They can be quite resilient to some impacts on the forest, but they need trees, they need the forest. So what we're also wanting to do, of course, is with long-term, gibbons don't make nests the way orangutans do, is with long-term monitoring of the population, and hopefully demonstrating that the work that BNF and all of our partners are doing is actually protecting these animals, so the population is, if not stable, if not increasing, it's at least stable.
So, beyond forest fires and the illegal wildlife trade, what are some threats faced by gibbons and what is being done for their conservation?
Well, I'd say the fires, the loss of habitat, and the illegal wildlife trade definitely are the biggest threats. Not so much in Indonesia, but certainly in places, Vietnam in particular. Gibbons are not just hunted for the pet trade, but they're hunted for meat, so bush meat. Which is, of course, a major threat. They live in very strict family units. So if one individual in the family unit is removed or killed, and generally to get a baby for the wildlife trade, you've got to kill the mother. This has a devastating impact on the rest of the individuals within that family. A lot of which we still don't fully understand what the knock-on issues are. So loss of habitat, and gibbons being removed from the wild for either the pet trade or for bushmeat really are the biggest threats.
You are a vice chair of the IUCN Species Survival Commission Primate Specialist Group's section on small apes. That's a very long commission name, but
it is very long, yes.
Talk about your work here.
So the purpose of just call it the SSA. It's much easier than that very big long name, but yes, the section on small apes. It's to try and bring together everyone who is working for gibbon conservation, whether that's in countries where gibbons live, or people who work in zoos where gibbons are not found naturally. So bringing together the zoos, the rescue centres, and people who work with gibbons in the wild, so that we can learn from each other, we can share knowledge and information, we can support the next generation of gibbonologists, or people who want to work with and study gibbons. We can, as a conservation community, I suppose, we can identify also things like what are the threats, what are the things that we need to be thinking about in terms of how to most effectively protect and conserve gibbons. And also, gibbons are in 11 countries, so each country, of course, has different issues, different severity of threat. Every country, of course, has a different legal system. So it's the idea is really just to support people who are working with gibbons.
You are working extensively on clouded leopards, so talk about your work on the species.
Yes, so we started using camera traps in 2008. And again, nobody had really studied cats in peat swamp forest before. We weren't even sure what species we might find. One of our team, Santiano, his father said that he had seen clouded leopards. But we had no proof in terms of photographs. So we put out the camera traps, hoping, and we did find clouded leopards. The Sabangao is home to 4 of the 5 cat species, not the bay cat, unfortunately. We started looking at issues around their threats, population density, numbers, distribution, movement, number of individuals, all sorts of other things. And then as we moved into the other 2 landscapes, when we've put camera traps out there, we're now leading a cat project. So working with lots and lots of different stakeholders, including governments, other universities, other NGOs, to identify what are the biggest threats to some of these cats. We don't have tigers on Borneo, and quite often the tigers get a lot of the attention, whereas the 5 Borneo cats don't get so much attention. So we're really just trying to raise awareness and understanding of where these cats are, what the threats are to them, and how we can try and mitigate some of those threats.
Could you just repeat the 5 species of cats which you're working on?
Oh, yes. So the biggest one is the clouded leopard. It's the top predator. Then we've got flat-headed cat, a marbled cat, the leopard cat, and the bay cat. So the bay cat's the endemic one that's only found on the island of Borneo.
What motivated you to shift from primates to felines?
I don't know if I shifted. I just kind of added the cats in. It was just one of these things that sort of somebody suggested, we could put the cameras out and see what happens. And then in some ways I had to sort of go back to school. I didn't know very much about cats, so I had to do a lot of reading about, clouded leopards and their behavior and all of the others. And it turns out there's actually a very large amount we don't know about all of these cats. So I suppose I wanted to champion these little known and not very well studied cats, because they're absolutely fascinating. I mean, love camera traps. They're just amazing because you get so much extra information. We've got cameras up in the canopy as well, so we get plenty of primate photos too. And I think for me, it was also just a way of kind of expanding my understanding. So not just about focusing on primates and the ecosystem, but how carnivores use the ecosystem as well. And we're fairly certain that at least clouded leopards probably hunt primates. So there's a link there as well.
So you also founded the Pareto River Initiative for Nature Conservation and Communities Expedition. So what was the idea behind this organization and what are you currently working upon?
So the idea with that was to really try and go up into the heart of Borneo area and explore more about it. I mean, gosh, that was 10 years ago. It's an area that previously, I think, had not received a great deal of conservation attention. There's not, there aren't really any orangutans up in that area. And I think part of the reason of that is that therefore it hasn't received a lot of conservation attention. So what we wanted to do was map the area, work with people to, if they were interested in, and they were, creating community forests. At the time it was called a community forest. They're now called social forestry units. But really just kind of raise awareness of this area. So at the moment, the pandemic obviously has had an impact on our ability to do any further work up in the mountains, but that is an area that so combined with the work that we're doing at BNF at the Burrito Ulu mountain site, we're looking to really try and put the area on the map, I suppose, in terms of understanding what is there, but also because of this area being so much more remote and more difficult to access, also understanding from local people what their challenges are and how conservation could perhaps support them, given how much more remote they are than many of the communities we work with who are closer to the regional capital.
What have been some of the most memorable moments from your conservation career so far?
Goodness. I think the first time in Sabangao that a wild gibbon sort of accepted me and the team being there, as in she didn't run away. So we say she became habituated, but I think basically she just decided that we weren't a threat, and sort of that being allowed into her life, to be able to spend the entire day with her and her family, observing them, seeing their behavior, their interactions, their play. Just that honor, I suppose, of being allowed, being accepted by this completely wild gibbon. And probably the second one would be when we got that first photograph of the clouded leopard, and from the camera trap, and we could absolutely confirm that they existed in the peat swamp forest. So that was another pretty special moment.
What have been some of the most prominent challenges you have faced in the last few years as your
I think one of the biggest challenges, not just for me, but I think in conservation in general, is the funding. People need to be paid, a good wage to do this. But a lot of the funding bodies, they'll give you money for a year, or if you're lucky, maybe 3 years. But conservation has to be a long-term investment. We've been going now, well, nearly 25 years. So I think the biggest challenge is that we're constantly having excuse me, to look for money. And we're very fortunate in that, you know, we've got some exceptional long-term funders who know our work, and they know what we do is trustworthy and reliable. But it's still a challenge, always having to be on the lookout for finding more money. Of course, you know, when we started, there was five, six of us. We now have over 100 full-time staff in Indonesia, and the international team, I think we're up to 12. So of course, everyone does need to be paid. So yes, one of the biggest challenges probably it's the funding, because this, like I said, conservation has to be a long-term investment. You can't just go in and expect to fix it in 6 months.
And my final question for you is that how can individuals contribute to PNF?
Having just spoken lots about money, we don't actually, I mean, obviously, if you have money, please, your donations would be gratefully received, but you don't have to give money to conservation. As I said, our social media platforms, English, French, and Indonesian, just sharing that sort of information and looking out and following us, we quite often have opportunities where you can get involved in different campaigns that we're doing that don't require you to donate money. So it's spreading the word, spreading the awareness, especially the campaigns we've just been running about, you know, the issues around the forest fires. So yes, as I said, if you have got any small money you wish to donate, it is always welcome. But I think just sharing the messages and the information is equally as important. If people don't know about these animals and this part of the world that we're trying to protect, people don't, it's difficult to care about something if you don't know about it. So the more awareness that we can spread, the better. So yeah, you don't need to give us money, but we do like money too.
So thank you so much for your time. It was a pleasure speaking to you today about all the great work you have done.
No, thank you. I hope it's been interesting. I hope people enjoy listening. And yes, you know, go onto our website and you can find out a lot more about all the different things that we're doing.